This invention came to life after one of my short videos unexpectedly went viral, reaching over 100 million views. Turns out in some parts of the world, wasps are practically worshipped, yet somehow these lovely wasps found their way back to the exact same spot. Maybe a few stragglers who couldn't figure out their nest was already gone. I wanted to come up with a creative way to relocate them without causing any harm. The concept was one thing in the digital world, looked great and worked like a charm. Bringing it to life was a whole different story, but with the help of a banana, I knew I could pull this off. I started by 3D printing the first prototype. By far the biggest problem were these leaves. At first, I had them flat, and then I added these thin poles that hung down, which would grab the stem of the nest better. That morphed into these bear claw looking things. Let me break down the invention so you can see just how many ways it could go wrong. This is the bottom threaded part that will screw onto my jar. It also has these rings around it so I can zip tie the entire device to a new location. This next part that goes on is the spin ring. It sits on top and rotates. Next, the stator goes on, which needs to lock onto the threaded part beneath the spin ring. The spin ring spins between these two parts, and then all the leaves get put into place. Their little pegs extend through the stator and into the slots on the spin ring. Rotating the spin ring makes the leaves move back and forth, and it's the cover that pushes all the leaves together and holds them down. The cover snaps onto the spin ring into these little gaps, and that makes everything but the stator move together. After playing with it and testing it on the jar, I was not confident enough it could actually pull off the nest and hold on to it. My next idea was to somehow add a zip tie around the inside of the iris. I printed a few pieces to test the size and placement, and when I had it right, I printed the final product. The head of the zip tie pushes into a little square hole, and the tail of the zip tie wraps around the inside of the stator. Then it goes through the head and through a thin slot to the outside of the stator, giving me access to the zip tie so I could pull and tighten it. You can see it tightly around the inside of the stator. The zip tie does make my iris hole smaller, which reduces the size of nest that I am able to remove, but for now I only had the small one in mind that I knew would still fit. Now to finally test the zip tie. It worked perfectly and had the added bonus of preventing the leaves from opening back up. You can see the zip tie intersecting the iris hole, which will pinch the stem of the nest. Then I had to take it completely apart to install a new zip tie. I installed the new zip tie and put everything back together for my next test. But first I had to prep the jar. I added air holes all around the top. The idea was that this jar would be their permanent new home. I had to make it as livable as possible. I used a zip tie to get a straight line around the jar, which I used as a guide to cut around the jar. I cut all the way around, leaving only a small section to use as a hinge. Then I cut these two holes in the bottom to tie a long string to. This is how I'm going to open the door without being too close to the wasps. I taped the door completely shut. I'm going to remove this tape once I have the nest relocated, and a small piece of tape in the center that I'll cut just enough of to pull the door open. Saying that just made me really nervous. The test subject is a banana. It has that organic stem I'm looking for. I cut it so it would come with some weight, even more than a nest would ever weigh. I also had to test it on the same surface that the wasps were on. I used zip tape wrapped around the stem to stick it on. It stuck really well. I swear these guys know who I am. That wasp has been so still and just stared at me the entire time. Back in my office, I screwed all my Nest Nabber invention and looked it over as I walked to my test site. I was nervous just testing on a banana. It was difficult to see if the stem was centered with the iris. First, I tested by putting it over a couple of times. And then when I confirmed with my little arrow that the iris was closed, I began pulling on the zip tie. The banana was really stuck, even the jar could hang from it. But when I pulled down, I realized a flaw in my design. This would have been catastrophic had this not been a test. I tried again, but this time slid the jar over to break off the stem. It was magnificent. It worked, and I couldn't stop looking at the banana hanging from my invention inside the jar. The stem was really on there. It even held on upside down like nothing. I enjoyed the banana and decided to add glue so the threaded section couldn't come off again. I think you may have seen what I saw. Let me go back. While editing, I realized something. It was in this clip that I had gotten the first glimpse of the actual stem. I had tried to see it before, but it was always covered by the wasps. I just figured it was similar to the thickness of the previous one, but it appears the stem does grow with the size of the nest. Duh. They were all staring at me when I went for another closer look. Nope. This was no banana. My iris wasn't ready to grab such a thin stem. I also realized the nest hung about 5 millimeters off of the flat surface, dangling from the small LED light. First, I printed the extension ring. I added spikes to it to help grip the surface. I glued this onto the top, which would bring the iris close to flush with the base of the stem. I printed more leaves that had bigger, better, and closer drop claws. But the biggest problem I had was getting this iris design to close tight. Closing it slow caused it to tighten down on itself, leaving too big of a hole. The iris had to close all the way, but it wouldn't unless I helped it. So I printed more leaves with different profiles. This one still wouldn't close tight. I tried these car-looking ones, but it still wouldn't close tight unless I closed it very fast, which was not an option. I was going to need to be slow to line up the nest right in the center before closing it all the way. I went through countless leaf designs. The whole thing just needed to be redesigned, but I'll do that when I go after the big nest. I went back to the orange ones, tried sanding them down smooth, then oiling the edges. But it seemed like it was just all getting worse. It would not close tight unless I helped it the rest of the way, which led me to my last-ditch effort. I tied a string around one of the drop claws and sent it out under the zip tie. So now I could close it as slow as I wanted and then pull on the string to help it the rest of the way. It was a ridiculous solution, but it worked. I tested it on a stem of grass. It did the job and got my iris tightly closed.
Oh!
The zip tie broke a drop claw, but it still had the stem in place. I was done messing around. At this point, I felt like I was delaying the inevitable failure this was going to be. It was time to just go for it. I checked the nest one last time. They were sheltering from the wind, so it was perfect timing. In the last moment, I got extra nervous and taped up some of the bigger air holes. I was ready to go, and I think they knew it. They were up from their nap, cleaning off and moving around. Then I thought, wait. Where are they going to relax and sleep near their nest like they do on top of theirs? My device would give them no room above the nest. I grabbed this scrap nest Nabber cover that happened to fit perfectly inside the jar. Now they had a place to land and chill. I taped it in and closed up the jar. It was go time.
Swoop.
I just went for it, and it was positioned perfectly. I waited for them to move off of their nest so I could close the iris. The trickiest part is getting it perfectly centered before closing it. I finally had the iris closed and grabbed my string to pull it shut, but I made a last-second adjustment, and the nest fell into the jar. I was incredibly disappointed, but I had the nest off of our home, and the wasps were safe and sound, so it wasn't a total failure. And as I turned the jar to get the nest to the top half,
Hey, it's stuck to the side. It's stuck to one of my holes.
it felt like a miracle. I had to finish the job. I went to their new location, which was this tree in the corner of our lot. I found the right location and zip tied it to the tree. The nest ended up falling to the bottom again, but I was happy to see that there were no eggs or babies inside. It was completely empty. I removed all of the safety tape from the hatch, and for the tape on the front, I pulled it down just enough so that I could pull it open from a distance. I put the blue line on the other side of our fence and got into position. I was about to do this, and I wasn't scared at all anymore. I ran for the woods. After some time, I retrieved my prototype. I have plans for a better one that would grab this larger one and bring all of its workers and family to safety. Subscribe and make sure you don't miss it.